So how much money do you actually need to quit your job and move abroad? I've seen so many estimations of this from other YouTubers, and so many of them are wildly inaccurate. I'm going to give you an honest answer right now. It's somewhere between $1,000 and $3,500. Depending on where you go and how you live. For all the British guys watching, throwing your hands in the air, questioning why the hell am I using dollars? It's because I do everything in dollars these days, and whether you like it or not, those little green bills make the world go round. I'm sure you can figure out the conversion. So that's it, $1,000. And for a lot of people watching, that's probably a lot less than you thought. But before you quit your job and hop on a flight, there are a few things that you need to understand about costs, about income, about tax, and about the mistakes that will kill your budget if nobody warns you about them. I've picked a basket of 6 places, all of which bar one I've actually lived in. They cover a range of different prices and are all very desirable locations that expats tend to want to live in. I'm just going to give a realistic budget on what it costs to live in each one of them, and I'm not going to go into too much detail on exactly what it's like to live in each one of them. If you do want more information on what it's like to actually live in these places from a person who's actually done it, rather than from your favorite AI, then by all means leave a comment down below and I'll make a video on this in the future. There is a caveat to the price breakdowns that I'm about to give you. They don't include the higher end stuff like the expensive alcohol and foreign imports, as well as excessive partying and eating out in expensive restaurants. If you do want to do those things, then your budget can really balloon. On the other end of the spectrum, you could probably reduce these budgets by 20 or 30% if you're prepared to house share or perhaps eat at the cheaper restaurants and not really go out too much. The estimates that I'm giving you are based on you having a 1-bed apartment to yourself, and although not living a necessarily extravagant life, living a life that is comparable to how you may live in your home country. So just to recap, these are moderate range budgets. You could probably go a little cheaper, and you could most definitely go far more expensive, depending on what you can afford. The first on the list is Da Nang in Vietnam. This is the only one of the spots that I've not actually lived in, but I have been several times, and I really love Vietnam as a destination. I also know plenty of people who do the biannual migration from Da Nang to Chiang Mai. This ensures that they are not only tax efficient but visa efficient, but more on that later. A decent 1-bedroom apartment will only cost you $300 to $500 a month, and food there is crazy cheap and delicious. For only $2 you can get a street food dish, and for about $5 to $20 you can get a decent restaurant meal. It's a great spot as it's right on the beach and it has a really thriving nomad scene with co-working spaces and coffee shops that sell that delicious punchy Vietnamese coffee. You can have a really decent quality of life in Da Nang for $1,000 to $1,500 a month, and if you really wanted to splurge, I think you'd struggle to spend more than $2,000. I picked Da Nang for this section, but there are plenty of other notable spots to check out if you really are on a budget. Others that I recommend checking out are El Salvador, Paraguay, and Cambodia. The next on the list is Medellin in Colombia. I know this place particularly well because I lived there for 5 years. Unfortunately, due to its popularity, the prices there have shot up recently. Most foreigners like to live in El Poblado, which is kind of the hub of the city. Unlike most online quotes that you'll see, realistically, you'll probably be spending between $1,200 and $2,000 a month on a 1-bed apartment in El Poblado. You can find cheaper options in El Poblado, but you probably have to sacrifice on the size of the apartment and the decor. Another option as well is to go for unfurnished if you are prepared to stick around for a while and buy your own furniture. You can quite easily acquire furniture from other expats who are moving on, and when you come to leave, you can quite easily sell it through Facebook groups. So if you don't mind having a smaller studio and having to shop around a little bit, then you can find perhaps a smaller place in El Poblado or go out to one of the other barrios like Laureles or Envigado. And in those places, as well as sometimes in Poblado, you'll find a decent 1-bedroom for around $500 to $1,000 a month. Although rent is high, food and the cost of living is generally cheap. You can get a menu del dia set lunch for around $5 to $10, and supermarket food is relatively cheap. If you want decent restaurant food, then it does get quite expensive because a lot of the lower end restaurants are not particularly good in terms of quality. So if you want a decent restaurant meal, you're probably going to pay upwards of $30 or $40. This is another one of those places where if you want to live it up a little, it can get very expensive very quickly, especially if you get involved in the Medellin nightlife scene. Comparable places that I also recommend checking out are Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Buenos Aires. The next on the list is Bangkok in Thailand, the magical, enigmatic city where I currently reside. It's one of those places that people often skip when they come to Thailand. On the face of it, it's just a big, dirty, smelly city. But if you're a city person, it's one of the best cities in the world, in my opinion. It's right up there with London, New York, and Madrid. Great energy, tons of cool spots to discover, and bags of character. Food scene is world class and extraordinarily cheap. Street food from $1.50 to $5, low-end restaurants from $3 to $8, and mid-range restaurants from $20 to $30. Unlike Medellin, the nightlife scene here is also varied and incredible. And there are as many Michelin-star restaurants as there are street food joints. So you can also spend heavily here too if you wanted to. In my view, Bangkok is by far the better of the two because you get way more value for the money that you spend. And if you want to live an extravagant lifestyle, the higher end stuff is also available here too. This is particularly true if you're a foodie like me because the food scene here is absolutely incredible. Whereas in Medellin, let's just say it's not. Next up is Bali, Indonesia. Bali has a reputation for a reason. It's a truly magical, beautiful island. The thriving yoga and wellness community, abundance of paddle courts, beaches, jungle, waterfalls, surf, and so much more. It's a digital nomad mecca, but the downside is it's becoming more and more overpopulated. But you can still make a life for yourself there. A one-bedroom in Canggu, which is the digital nomad epicenter, will set you back about $600 to $900 a month. You can get cheaper in Ubud or Sanur if you want to go somewhere a bit more chill and off the beaten track. Bali's probably the easiest place to overspend as it's just jam-packed, full of tourist destinations, brunch spots, and wellness centers, all priced at tourist rates. If you do go to local Balinese restaurants, you can eat for as little as $1 to $3, but do be careful because Bali belly is a real thing. Supermarkets are stacked with foreign imports and not all that cheap, and there's no real in-between in terms of restaurants. You're either eating incredibly cheap or you're paying tourist prices. Canggu rents are up 18% year on year, so if you do want to move to Bali, you better get there quick. Overall, you could live in Bali for around $2,000 to $2,500 a month. You are paying a bit of a premium, but it's probably worth it on balance because it is a really beautiful island. Although there's nowhere that really directly compares, some comparable spots would probably be Phuket in Thailand, or as a curveball, perhaps Lombok, which is the adjacent island. It is less developed than Bali, but it is developing at the same time. It has a much more chill vibe and most of the same charm that Bali has. Next is the European pick. I picked Lisbon in Portugal because it's a popular nomad hub in Europe, but also because I lived there for 2 years. It's 25% cheaper than Madrid and 40% cheaper than Paris, but still considerably more expensive than Southeast Asia or South America. Rent in Lisbon is insane. You get very little for what you actually spend. You can go a little cheaper, but you'll end up with a place that has a 1970s bathroom and kitchen and perhaps doesn't even have simple things like a hob or heating. For a half-decent one-bedroom, you're looking at $1,400 to $1,600 a month at a minimum. The good news is that the rest of the living expenses in Lisbon are incredibly cheap. You can get a prato del dia set menu for around 8 to 12 euros, and that usually even includes a glass of wine. All in, the budget in Lisbon is around $2,500 to $3,000 a month. The last on the list is Dubai, where I actually hold residency still. It's a lot less expensive than people think, but the caveat is if you do want to spend a lot of money, then you most certainly can. I'd say it's comparable to a city like London in terms of what you can actually comfortably live on. You should also take into account that you can seamlessly not pay tax living in Dubai. So you can pretty much deduct 30 to 40% from what your average monthly outgoings would be. That said, you can more or less do the same in most of the places on this list and still have a cheaper pre-tax outlay, especially if you're savvy and tax efficient, which I will talk about a bit more later and in later videos. Rent for a one-bedroom apartment runs from $1,500 to $2,500. The rest of food and lifestyle is at a bit of a premium, but you can still comfortably budget for around $3,500 a month. So I've just stuck to the ballpark figures here, and I haven't really discussed the livability of these places. But if you want me to do a video where I go into a deeper dive on these things, by all means leave a comment down below. I do want to talk about tax here, as it is an expense that will affect your overall cost of living, wherever you live. One of the perks of living abroad is that you do get to pick your tax code. And although I do not recommend tax evasion, which is illegal, tax avoidance avoidance by legal means is not. Seen as it's one of your biggest expenses, especially the more money you make, it is prudent to limit the liability that you have. I will make a dedicated video on tax and offshore incorporation in the future, but for now, I'd just like to give you some food for thought. There are several ways to do this. You can live in a tax jurisdiction like the UAE, where you just don't pay any tax and be done with it. Or if you're planning to make money from investing or from a business, then you can incorporate said business in a country like the UAE or the Cayman Islands, so that the business doesn't pay any or pays very little tax. As an individual, on many of the visas that you'll be able to obtain in many countries you can live in around the world, you'll be obliged to pay very little or no tax at all. This will leave more money in your pocket for investing or extra fund tokens for life. I do apologize to any of our American friends watching, because I know thanks to the tax laws in the US and the IRS, this is absolutely not possible for you, as you are taxed anywhere in the world that you live. But for most other countries, this is perfectly legal and doable. As a side note, one of the countries that has the same tax code as the US is actually Colombia. So if you are planning to live there for more than 6 months a year, and then by de facto become a tax resident in Colombia, then that is something that you should be aware of. Although it must be said that in Colombia, there are ways and means to get around this. But to quote my Colombian accountant, that depends on how well you want to sleep at night. Personally, I do like my sleep at night, so I prefer, and I would advise you, to stay within the realms of what is legal when it comes to taxation. Avoiding tax illegally is not worth the headache when there are a multitude of legal options you have to avoid tax without getting yourself into hot water. Another way to do this, which is much more of a gray area, is to never reside in a country for long enough to automatically trigger becoming a tax resident. For most countries, this is 183 days a year. This works especially well if you have an offshore business. That place then becomes your tax residency, as well as the place that you do your banking and pay your taxes, if any. This ties in very well with a truly nomadic way of life. You can pick, say, 2 or 3 places and live in each of them for a few weeks or months at a time, depending on how long they give you on a tourist visa. The downside of this is that it's very hard to really settle anywhere. Some people can make this work, but for me, I eventually wanted a home base. What I will say is this: if wanting to reduce your tax bill is one of the reasons that you're considering this lifestyle, then the opportunity is very real. But I want to be clear, this needs to be set up with the correct legal and financial advice for your particular situation. I'm sharing what exists and telling you what can be done, but I'm not telling you to do it without the proper guidance. So we've covered the costs, but the other side of the coin is what kind of income do you actually require to live this kind of lifestyle? The minimum viable income to make this work, factoring in a little bit of leeway and not living like a monk, is about $1,500 to $2,500 per month for Southeast Asia and Latin America. That gives you options. It covers your costs, it leaves a little for saving and investing, and a little for splurging on the odd month that you want to, as well as a bit extra for the inevitable trips home or luxury expenses. For Lisbon, you're looking at $3,500 to $4,000 a month, and for Dubai, around $4,000 to $5,000 a month. Although you are saving a lot of money on taxes in Dubai, so it's not technically that much. The income doesn't necessarily need to be completely sorted before you leave, but if it's not, then you need a decent amount of runway and a clear plan as to how you're going to generate that income in the future. A productivity trap that I and many others have fallen into is that when you arrive in a place with all the will in the world to get straight to work, you can't help but feel like you're on holiday, and you end up procrastinating rather than getting started. If you have a little bit of runway, then this is absolutely fine. But if you don't, this is a really great way to end up on a round trip straight back home and back to your old job. You also need a clear plan about how you're going to generate said income, whether it's freelancing, an online business, remote employment, or investment. There are more options than ever, and I'll be making a video about that soon. Before I sign off, I want to give you a few bonus tips that will save you significant money wherever you go. Get off of sites like Airbnb and Booking.com as soon as possible. Once you're actually on the ground in a place, you can contact owners through Airbnb and Booking directly and message them and ask them if they have a website. Then rather than booking direct with the platform, you can book direct with them. Often this is much cheaper. The real hack here is Facebook groups. You often get Facebook groups that are full of local agents and other expats, and you'll get subletting opportunities from other expats who've got a contract that they can't get out of and are highly motivated to get the place leased for below market value. If you're doing the nomad style but in more of a slow mad style, as they call it, which means that you probably spend, say, at least a month in each place, perhaps more, then another great way to be cost effective on accommodation is to pick 2 places, for example Da Nang and Chiang Mai, find a good deal in each one and rent a condo for a year in each place. When you actually do the maths, it ends up cheaper doing it this way than constantly changing Airbnbs. And the added perk is that you have a home base in each place and you can kind of live between the two. Lastly, and as I touched on earlier, it's really important to have a runway of at least 3 to 6 months, but better a year, before you make the leap. Not because you'll necessarily need it, but because you never know what life will throw at you, and it's always better to have that bit of a rainy day fund, just in case. This obviously depends on your earning power and where you're at with your finances. So to come back to the original question, how much do you actually need? And the answer is somewhere between $1,000 and $4,000, depending on where you go and how you live. I would say that amount is achievable for most people from Western countries. The question isn't really whether you can afford it, it's more whether you're willing to make the moves necessary to get you there. And more importantly, are you prepared to make the jump, and are you doing it for the right reasons? As with any big life-changing decision, often the hardest part is the initial jump to break the inertia. I was an ordinary guy who figured this out over 10 years living across 3 different continents. I made plenty of expensive mistakes along the way. This channel exists so you don't have to. So if you're a man who's done living a life that you never consciously chose and brave enough to build a better one, then stick around for future videos and the upcoming community that I'm going to build. As ever, please do like and subscribe. If you do want to talk through your specific situation, where you're at, what's holding you back, what the next step might look like, then by all means do drop me a line. I'd be really happy to help. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.